At 7 in the morning, the day kicked off with a man finishing a hard 10-kilometer run, sweat still dripping as he slowed to a stop. From there until noon, he trained non-stop, practicing kendo and striking a wooden dummy 500 times straight to the head. By 5 in the evening, he was back at it in the gym, pushing his body under the watch of a coach, following a brutal plan of bench press, squats, and deadlifts, 10 reps per set, 10 sets each. To repeat this routine for 14 straight days, he had already handed in his resignation at the office, choosing to quit his job without hesitation. He remembered someone calling him insane for throwing away his career just to train his body, and, as the thought lingered, he quietly admitted that maybe being crazy wouldn't have been so bad. Right then, a glowing system window suddenly appeared in front of him. It announced that the door of the end was about to open and that only 5 seconds remained before the end of days arrived. The system urged him to prepare, issuing quests meant to strengthen him for the coming catastrophe. As the seconds ticked away, the counter hit 0, and the end of days finally descended upon the world. 15 days earlier, every person received an alert on their phone warning of a severe disaster, stating that monsters had appeared near Inwang Mountain and that nearby residents had to evacuate immediately to avoid encountering them. The sudden message left people baffled, with many assuming it was nothing more than a bad joke or a false alarm. Moments later, a live news broadcast appeared on their screens, where a field reporter confirmed that the monsters were real and that the situation was no prank. Wanting better footage, the reporter told viewers he would move closer to get a clearer look at the creature. Instantly, the comments section exploded, with people desperately typing that the monster was standing right behind him. Laughing it off, the reporter said he didn't believe them, insisting he had checked just seconds ago and the monster hadn't moved at all. In the next instant, the creature appeared directly behind him and killed him on the spot. The sudden scream echoed through the broadcast, shocking a man watching the scene, Lee Hoyoung. As Lee Hoyoung continued down the street, he felt uneasy because the video he had just watched looked disturbingly real, and disaster alerts kept buzzing on everyone's phones all day, making him wonder what was truly going on. He thought bitterly that life was already hard enough just trying to earn a living, so the idea of monsters suddenly appearing was something he refused to accept. Convincing himself it had to be another fake clip like so many others online, Lee was about to dismiss it all, until he lifted his head and froze at the sight of a wounded monster lying right in front of him. Confusion rushed through his mind as he wondered why a creature like that was hurt and collapsed on the ground. Fear took over almost instantly, and his first instinct was to turn around and run as fast as he could. Trying to ignore what he saw, Lee loudly muttered an excuse to himself, claiming he had to hurry home because his math teacher was coming today. At that moment, the injured monster weakly reached out to stop him and looked up with an oddly innocent expression, asking Lee to help. Lee hesitated, unsure if the creature was truly begging for assistance. But no matter how pitiful it acted or how cute it tried to seem, its terrifying appearance made his skin crawl and kept him from getting any closer. Lee told himself that he was human and the being in front of him was a monster, and he wasn't kind enough to feel sympathy for something like that, insisting that no matter how pure those eyes looked, he couldn't bring himself to help it. But then the creature slowly pulled out a small picture, showing what looked like its family, crying as it pointed again and again, clearly begging to return to them. Seeing that broke something inside Lee, and before he could stop himself, he gave in and chose to help the monster after all. Not long after, Lee was back at his house when a system window suddenly appeared, informing him that he had obtained a silver goblin pill, and that consuming it would grant him an unknown, hidden benefit. Lee stared in disbelief, thinking it was strange enough that he had helped the monster, but now he had even received a reward from it, which didn't match what monsters were supposed to be like. Curious about the gift and confused by the system that kept popping up, Lee reached out and touched the screen, wondering if it was some kind of advanced hologram. His thoughts then shifted to the pill itself, questioning what would happen if he actually swallowed something given by a monster. At that exact moment, a breaking news alert flashed across the television, where a reporter announced that massive, unknown structures had suddenly appeared across the world, shaped like towering spires, and that all contact had been lost with the U.S. military units sent inside one of them. Hearing the broadcast, Lee froze in disbelief as monsters and mysterious towers became reality, making him wonder if the end of the world had truly begun. Just then, as he held the pill in his palm, a violent blast shook the area outside his house. People screamed and scattered in panic, and moments later, everyone stopped in shock when a massive tower rose from the ground without warning. The reporter urgently announced that another enormous tower had appeared in Korea. Staring at the structure, standing dangerously close to his home, Lee tightened his grip and made up his mind to use the pill the monster had given him. He wasn't sure if this choice was right, But he knew this was the only moment he would ever dare to do something so reckless as swallowing a monster's gift. Without hesitating further, he consumed it, and instantly a powerful force burst out from his body. The system reappeared, informing him that he had acquired the Sage status window, a blessing meant to greatly increase his chances of survival. Shimmering fragments like puzzle pieces gathered in midair, slowly shaping themselves into a radiant book. Lee reached out in disbelief, staring at the glowing book now resting firmly in his hands. The moment Lee opened the book, a blinding glow poured out, flooding the room, and the system appeared again with a warning. The gate to the end of days would open in exactly 15 days, for hours and 12 minutes. It told Lee to get ready for what was coming and strongly advised him to train his body, immediately assigning a series of tasks that included strength workouts, endurance training, and practicing kendo for the time he had left. Faced with this message, Lee chose to obey without hesitation. Days slipped by as he followed every instruction, cutting off everything else in his life and dedicating all 15 days solely to training. When the countdown finally reached its end, the door of the apocalypse opened. The system alert that followed caught Lee off guard, as it looked nothing like what he had imagined. A dull sword suddenly appeared in front of him, leaving him staring in disbelief at the weapon that had just been summoned. The system then announced that the game had officially begun and that the tutorial phase was over. Finally, it informed him that his aptitude test was complete and that, based on the collected data, he would now receive the class best suited for him. The system announced that Lee had been assigned the class of combat swordsmanship, and the moment he saw it, he was taken aback, never expecting something like that. It then instructed him to check his status screen for full information, but when Lee opened it, his head spun as countless panels and lines of text appeared all at once. After calming down, he focused and noticed that he was a level 1 swordsman with a level 1 basic sword skill. His attributes, endurance, power, speed, and perception, were all extremely low, which made sense since he had only just begun. Rising to his feet, Lee gripped the sword in his hand, excitement bubbling up as the reality of being a combat swordsman finally sank in. He felt that this was the true starting point of everything. At that moment, the system displayed 2 mission choices he had to clear at least one of. The first task was to stay alive inside the forest for a full hour, while the second was to locate an exit and escape the area. Lee frowned, wondering that if this really counted as a tutorial, shouldn't it give him some breathing room before throwing him straight into danger? Lee checked the guidebook stored inside the system, and it clearly advised him to use the entire 60 minutes of the tutorial to hunt as many creatures as possible. It even warned that picking the escape option would slow his growth and was strongly discouraged. This surprised Lee, especially when he realized he could still access the Sage's status window during the tutorial phase. At that moment, he understood why the system had pushed him to train his body beforehand. It had predicted this exact scenario. Following the guide's advice, Lee decided that running away from the forest would be a waste. Just then, the system announced that the tutorial had officially begun, and almost immediately, a small creature appeared before him. Lee blinked in confusion when he saw it was only a level 1, one-horned raccoon, far cuter than he imagined a monster would be. That illusion shattered instantly as the creature twisted its face into a feral snarl and leapt straight at him. Acting on instinct, Lee swung his sword and cut it down cleanly, realizing with surprise that defeating it was far easier than he expected. The system immediately declared that the one-horned raccoon had been defeated, and Lee was rewarded with experience for the kill. Since the creature fell from single use of basic sword technique, Lee figured it was weak by design, nothing more than a beginner enemy. He then noticed that activating the skill had drained 2 points of mana, and with only 10 mana in total, he realized he could swing it just 5 more times. That realization made him cautious, and he decided he would need to save his mana carefully while continuing the hunt. After cutting down monster after monster, a sudden change occurred as his level finally increased, pushing him to level 2, and along with it, his health and mana fully recovered. The system informed him that leveling up would now grant stat points, which could be used to strengthen his attributes, and this news filled Lee with excitement. He felt relieved he had leveled up just in time, since his mana had been nearly empty. However, his relief turned to confusion when the system screen began fading away, only for it to explain that because he possessed the Sage's status window, his leveling speed would be slower than that of normal players. Lee was stunned when he learned the truth and finally understood that the Sage's status came with a price. What shocked him even more was realizing that the level he had just earned was gone, making him wonder how long it would take to climb again. The frustration hit hard, and he cursed the unfair drawback that came with such a rare ability. Curious and irritated, he opened his status screen, only to freeze when the numbers didn't look right at all. As he studied them more closely, he noticed something strange. His points were still there. That's when a new thought struck him. Maybe this wasn't a punishment, but a broken advantage instead. His level had dropped back to 1, just as expected, yet the leftover points kept increasing. He quickly realized that since each level demanded more experience than the last, boosting his stats this way might be far more efficient than leveling normally. With that realization, Lee decided that from now on, he would focus on strengthening his attributes. And as he scanned the screen, he saw 4 different options waiting for him to choose from. Lee weighed his options and figured that power and speed were the natural picks for a sword fighter, since more strength meant heavier hits and more agility meant quicker movement and sharper reactions. But after a moment of thought, he decided that what he needed most right now was awareness. So he invested his points in his sensitivity instead. As he continued cutting down one-horned raccoons, he realized the creatures nearby were weak since this was still the tutorial zone, and beating them with his base stats wasn't hard at all. The real issue was that there weren't many raccoons around, and the limited time made it hard to farm enough to boost his attributes. That was exactly why he chose sensitivity, and once it increased, tracking down the monsters became far easier than before. Just as he was thinking through his plan, a system message suddenly appeared, announcing that all nearby monsters had been cleared and that a hidden quest had been triggered. At that instant, a massive level 2 creature stepped out behind him, a one-horned raccoon alpha, staring at Lee with raw hostility. Feeling the pressure, Lee swallowed and wondered what kind of monster had just appeared before him. The monster suddenly lunged at Lee with a strong attack, but Lee barely managed to dodge it in time. He thought to himself how fast the creature was and wondered if this was the tutorial boss. Trying to stay calm, Lee decided to carefully watch and study the fight. As he looked closer, he noticed this monster was unlike the other one-horned raccoons he had fought before. Even though it was stronger, Lee believed it was still possible to beat it. After a tense battle, the system popped up, announcing that Lee had defeated the one-horned raccoon alpha and completed the hidden quest, rewarding him with some gold. Then the system declared the tutorial was finished. Lee realized that the hour had felt longer than he expected, but was relieved it was finally over. However, when he opened his eyes, he was shocked to find himself in a completely new place, standing among a crowd of other people. Just then, a loud announcement congratulated everyone for finishing the tutorial. It explained that they were now in the tower's lobby, specifically in the C-2567 area. Lee was puzzled by the word lobby and wondered what it meant. Looking around, he saw 14 men and 11 women and guessed they had all completed the same tutorial and were brought here like him. Most people seemed scared, which made sense since the world had changed so much in just one day. Lee thought that if he hadn't known the world was ending, he'd probably be scared too. He told himself to stay calm and promised to survive this challenge. Suddenly, a woman asked where exactly they were. At that moment, a small figure appeared and told her they were inside the tower called the Tower of the End. When the woman looked down, she couldn't believe her eyes. A rabbit was talking back to her. The rabbit introduced itself as Kumkum, the manager of the tower's lower floor. Everyone stared in disbelief, bombarding Kumkum with questions. How did it suddenly appear? Was it just a kid in a rabbit costume? Or maybe it was the one who had gathered all of them in this strange tower. Kumkum sighed quietly, knowing this was the usual reaction from people. Then Lee stepped forward, asking Kumkum one important thing. If this really was the end of the world, what were they supposed to do now? Kumkum smiled slyly and told Lee that was a very smart question. With a mischievous grin, Kumkum announced to everyone that all 22 players waiting in the tower's lobby would be forced into a deadly game, where their lives were on the line. Shock rippled through the crowd at the thought of risking their lives. Kumkum went on to explain that every human on Earth was trapped inside the tower, and the only way to survive was by teaming up to complete missions and climb each floor. Lee then asked if they could return to their old lives once they reached the top. Kumkum chuckled and admitted it had no idea what awaited them at the summit. Hearing this, Lee asked Kumkum what the real purpose was behind climbing the tower. Kumkum shrugged off the question, saying there was no need to dig for meaning. Lee just had to follow the rules and do what he was told. It added that anyone who refused to climb would only meet death, and many had already perished during the tutorial rounds. Lee suddenly felt a wave of panic. He hadn't expected people to actually die, especially so early, and he knew plenty wouldn't even finish the tutorial alive. Then, out of nowhere, Kumkum challenged everyone, asking if anyone dared to try killing it, explaining that it needed to be defeated for them to get home. On top of that, anyone who helped kill Kumkum would earn a special reward. The crowd was stunned and confused, but Lee immediately suspected a trap. Kumkum didn't look powerful, but being level 55 meant Lee had no chance in a fight. Deciding it was safer to hold back and watch for now, Lee hesitated, But just then, a system message appeared, ordering Lee to assist the lower floor manager, Kumkum, in getting home. Lee mulled over the whole situation, wondering how exactly he was supposed to help Kumkum get home, and if it was even safe to try attacking the rabbit. He thought about how following the guide had always worked out so far, but now he wasn't sure if taking a risk like this was worth it. Confused and uncertain, Lee stood frozen, unsure what to do next. Just then, a man stepped forward, volunteering to help Kumkum get home. With a sly smile, the man told Kumkum that if it wanted to die so badly, he was more than willing to make that happen. Lee thought to himself that he was too slow to offer first, as the man raised his sword, warning Kumkum not to regret what was coming and promising a painful death. But before the man could strike, Kumkum's face twisted into something fierce, and in a blink, the rabbit landed a brutal hit that sliced the man's head clean off, sending it flying through the air. The crowd gasped, frozen with fear, unable to react. Kumkum then grinned wickedly and said it had just accidentally counterattacked, but everyone screamed in terror, too stunned by the brutal display to believe otherwise. Lee stood silent, heart pounding, thinking how close he had been to facing that same fate if he had stepped up first. Kumkum quickly apologized, saying it was just a mistake and asked if anyone else would volunteer, but nobody believed it. Fearful, everyone started backing away, desperate to get as far from Kumkum as possible. Lee wondered if the guide had tricked him. Kumkum then stretched out its paw again, pleading for help to get home, but after witnessing the brutal attack, no one dared come forward. Frustrated, Lee questioned why the guide might have lied, so he opened the guidebook again. That's when he discovered a hidden skill called Sage's Eyes, separate from the usual Sage's status window. Using Sage's Eyes would trigger a special window, allowing him to see other people's status. Curious why this new skill appeared out of nowhere, Lee activated Sage's Eyes on Kumkum. A smile spread across his face as the answer to helping Kumkum became clear. While Kumkum kept begging for aid, Lee stepped up and volunteered to help. As he offered, Lee reassured himself that the guide hadn't lied after all. Kumkum looked Lee over and pointed out he was just level 1, but Lee cut in confidently, saying that level didn't matter when doing something good. Kumkum smirked wickedly and agreed, saying Lee was right. Kumkum told Lee to hurry up and send it home. But just as Lee reached for his sword, a woman stopped him, warning it was too risky since they had just seen someone die trying to do the same. Soon, others joined in, agreeing Lee shouldn't be reckless. But Lee cut them off calmly, saying he had a plan and promised everyone they were about to witness something amazing. Everyone looked at him, puzzled, wondering what kind of plan he could have. Suddenly, Kumkum lunged at Lee, but Lee stayed calm, not afraid at all. Then, Lee realized something was off. Kumkum said there were 24 players in the lobby, but Lee was sure there were 25. At first, he thought it was a slip-up, but then he figured it was on purpose, a test to scare them with the idea of facing a powerful level 55 monster. The number was wrong because one of the people was actually a hologram, the one who died earlier. Everyone gasped as Kumkum struck Lee with a strong blow, but Lee wasn't worried because not only was the dead man a hologram, Kumkum was 1-2, meaning its attack did 0 damage. Lee had discovered all this by using his Sage's Eyes to check Kumkum's stats and saw it was just a projection. Realizing Lee had seen through the trick, Kumkum praised him, saying he was pretty sharp. It added that for brave people like Lee, luck might just be on their side, then vanished into thin air. When Kumkum disappeared, it left behind a glowing green pill as a reward for Lee. Everyone then understood that Kumkum was just a hologram, nothing more than a fake. One person asked Lee how he had figured it out so quickly. Lee explained that he noticed something strange. Blood should have splattered on Chai Yiziel, the woman who had warned him, since she was standing so close to the dead person. But she wasn't covered in a single drop. That's when Lee realized the whole scene was staged. Chai touched her face and confirmed Lee was right. There wasn't any blood on her at all. Just then, a tall man named Kim Seong, who was level 4, stepped forward. Seong told Lee it would be a shame to keep the reward all to himself, and said Lee was just lucky to figure out first. He added that if he had noticed sooner, he would have done the same thing. Curious, Lee asked why Seong thought it would be a waste. Seong explained that since Lee was still level 1 after finishing the tutorial, it meant he was either really weak or hadn't fought at all, probably just ran away to survive. Seong sneered and told Lee he'd probably die fast anyway, so for the sake of everyone else, he should just hand over that reward right now. Lee thought to himself that Seong was ridiculously full of himself and couldn't believe he was actually serious. Without hesitation, Lee used the green pill right in front of Seong and gained a stat point. Seong's jaw dropped, stunned that Lee had defied his expectations. Lee smirked and told Seong that giving up wasn't his style and he wasn't about to surrender to anyone. Seong got mad and shot back that Lee was just a weak loser, acting tough to hide the fact that he was still level 1. Lee thought it would be smart to stay away from people like Seong, but he wondered how long he could keep dodging trouble. Just then, an announcement echoed through the room, saying everyone would now get their starting gold, which they could spend in the shop. On top of that, extra gold would be awarded based on how many monsters they'd killed in the tutorial. The announcement added that the highest gold earned by a player during the tutorial was 7,400. Everyone's eyes widened at the thought of someone getting that much gold. Seong looked annoyed, realizing he should have done better killing monsters back then. Another guy named Kim Junsong piped up, saying he didn't know who came first, but whoever it was had to be incredible. No one knew who had earned the most gold, except Lee, who quietly held the top spot with 7,400 gold from killing the most monsters in the tutorial. Lee decided to keep this a secret since Seong was already jealous over just a single stat point, and he didn't want to invite more trouble. Opening the shop, Lee noticed there were 3 ways to spend gold: buy items, level up skills, or increase stats. Lee chose to spend half his gold on boosting his stats, raising his strength, stamina, agility, and sensitivity all by 20 points. While he focused on upgrading, Seong grew visibly angry because leveling skills cost a lot. Spotting Seong's frustration, Lee decided to spend 1,500 gold improving his basic sword skill. He also picked up some new clothes since he was tired of wearing the same gym uniform. Just then, Chai Yiziel approached Lee, saying she wanted to ask for his advice. Surprised, Lee asked why she had come to him when he was just level 1. Yiziel smiled and said she didn't care about his level. She admired his courage instead. Lee was taken aback by her words. Curious, he used his skills to check her stats, then asked how much gold she had. Yiziel replied she had 800 gold saved up. Lee noticed that Yiziel was being honest about her gold. She didn't try to hide anything. He quickly decided to keep his secret cheat key to himself. To keep things casual, Lee asked if Yiziel liked exercising, and she replied that she didn't mind walking. Lee guessed her stamina probably wasn't very strong, and Yiziel nodded in agreement. He told her that if her stamina was low, she should focus on improving it first, because no matter how much gold she spent on items, she wouldn't last long without enough stamina. Feeling encouraged, Yiziel thanked Lee and promised to follow his advice. Suddenly, an announcement came through saying the first floor mission would start soon, and they needed to form teams of 3. If anyone didn't have a team, they'd be assigned to a random group. Players were given 3 minutes to choose their parties. Lee thought to himself he expected a group mission eventually, but not this soon. Then Junsong spoke up, suggesting since everyone could see each other's levels, they should also share their classes. Following his idea, players began revealing their classes and started picking teammates they wanted to join for the mission. Yiziel approached Lee and asked if he wanted to team up for the upcoming group mission, becoming the first member of his party. Lee didn't hesitate to agree. Having a healer like Yiziel on his team was a big advantage. But things weren't as easy with the others. Every single one of them turned down Lee's offer to join his group. Lee figured that even though they had a healer, people probably didn't want to team up with someone as low level as him. It made sense. A level 1 swordsman wasn't exactly a tempting partner. Watching the others, Lee saw that most players had already formed teams with people around their own level. The only ones left without a team were the people Lee least wanted to be with. After a few minutes, an announcement said the 3-minute team building window was over, and anyone without a full party would be assigned randomly. It also announced that the first floor mission was about to start. Seong, now stuck in the same group as Lee and Yiziel, grumbled that he was unlucky to be teamed with a low-level bottom feeder like Lee. Lee thought to himself that he didn't want to be teamed with Seong either, but surprisingly, Seong was even less popular despite being level 4. Seong glared at Lee with annoyance and snapped, "What are you staring at? Just move away." Lee wondered if working with Seong was even possible, but he quickly made up his mind. No matter what, he'd find a way to cooperate with Seong if he wanted to survive in this tower. Right then, the system popped up with their mission: eliminate the Kobold tribe within 12 hours. As the trio walked through the forest, they finally reached the Kobold camp. Seong turned to Lee and said he would take care of wiping out the tribe, warning Lee not to get in his way. Lee reminded Seong that this was a team mission, not a solo job. That made Seong furious. He called Lee a loser and said he was only letting Lee tag along out of kindness. So, Lee had no right to boss him around. Lee sighed and replied, "Fine, they'll just ride on your coattails and see how well you do." Lee decided to just go along with Seong for now. Seong told him, "You've been riding my coattails from the start, so why act all rebellious now?" He added that Lee should only start trying hard when his life was actually in danger. Lee gave a sarcastic, "Thanks for the advice." Yiziel looked worried, wondering if their team was going to hold together. As they neared the Kobold camp, Seong grumbled about all the bugs around, while Lee grew annoyed at Seong's complaining and hoped they could finish the mission without problems. Looking up, Lee noticed there really were a lot of bugs, which made sense since they were in the mountains. Yziel then asked Lee if the kobolds were strong. Lee said they might be tougher than the one-horned raccoon they'd faced before, but since they were still level 1, they should be able to handle them. He also warned Yziel to stay alert, because in the Tower of the End, anything could happen. Yziel nodded in agreement. As they got closer, Lee noticed the kobold was level 5 and incredibly muscular from head to toe. He was surprised because this monster was way tougher than the ones they had faced in the tutorial. Yziel also spotted the kobold and told Lee it was clearly stronger than before, then asked what their plan was. Lee suggested they should first check the area carefully since there might be more kobolds hiding nearby. But before Lee could finish, Seong suddenly stepped into the open and snapped at Lee, saying it was because Lee kept hiding instead of fighting that he was still stuck at level 1. Without waiting, Seong charged straight at the kobold and struck it hard on the head. Lee and Yziel were shocked Seong would just rush in like that without a plan. Seong's hit didn't do much damage, and the angry kobold glared back. Still, Seong didn't back down and started landing a flurry of heavy attacks. Lee thought to himself how reckless and stubborn Seong was to jump in like that alone. Just then, Yziel stepped forward, telling Lee she would support Seong by healing him. Lee felt relieved they weren't surrounded by more kobolds, or else things could have gotten much worse. As Lee watched Seong fight the kobold, he could see Seong was definitely showing off his level. With Yziel healing him, Seong might even beat the kobold on his own. But Lee was surprised that Seong's attacks didn't do as much damage as he expected given his strength, and he wondered if the kobold had some special defense. Lee quickly checked his guidebook for help. The book said kobolds were usually peaceful and wouldn't attack unless provoked. Lee thought to himself that Seong had just stirred up trouble for no good reason. Still, he tried to see the bright side. He needed to catch some kobolds anyway for research, so the fight wasn't all bad. Then, as Lee kept reading the guidebook, he spotted something that might give them an advantage in the battle. Seong tried to use his level 1 skill, Stone Fist, and swung a punch at the kobold, but he missed and hit a tree instead. The tree broke and crashed down, landing right on the head of another kobold nearby, who was level 6 and even stronger than the one Seong had been fighting. Seong immediately regretted his mistake. As the bigger kobold charged at him, Seong worried he was in serious trouble. He looked around for Lee, wondering why he wasn't helping, but when he turned, Lee was nowhere to be seen. Seong guessed Lee had probably run off scared. Just then, the kobold swung at Seong, but Yziel jumped in to block the attack and protect him. While warning Seong to be careful, Yziel slipped and fell to the ground. The kobold was about to strike her with a powerful blow, and Yziel thought this might be the end for her. Suddenly, Lee appeared from behind, threw a strange fruit into the air, and sliced it open. The fruit's juice spilled onto his sword as he swung, cutting the kobold and dealing massive damage, killing it instantly. The system then popped up, congratulating Lee for defeating the level 6 kobold. Seong and Yziel were both stunned to see Lee take down the kobold with just one clean slash. Lee smiled to himself, realizing that while the bugs ate the fruit from the trees, the kobolds hadn't touched a single one. That seemed strange. Checking his guidebook, Lee found out the fruit was called a poison apple, and kobolds were weak against poison. The book even suggested collecting these fruits from the mountain to use them in battle against the kobolds. Lee understood that using the poison apples was the secret to finishing the level 1 mission. Seong was annoyed by how things turned out, but Lee walked over to Yziel and helped her up, asking if she was alright. She thanked him and said she was fine. Lee admitted he hadn't expected another kobold to be drawn in by the fight, and said it would have been dangerous if had been late. Yziel appreciated that he arrived just in time to save both her and Seong. When Yziel asked where Lee had gone, he was about to answer, but Seong cut in angrily, calling Lee a free rider who hid safely while Seong did the hard work and only showed up to steal the final hit. Lee was puzzled by Seong's complaints, while Seong kept accusing Lee of being unfair for stealing the stat points that should have been his after fighting the kobolds. Without waiting for a reply, Seong stormed off, saying he was the bigger person since he was a higher level and would let it slide. Lee thought Seong was acting crazy. If Lee hadn't helped, Seong would have been in serious trouble or worse. Watching Seong's behavior, Lee figured Seong didn't understand the situation and would only make things harder for himself if he kept acting like this. Later in the kobold village, Seong was fighting hard, but his attacks barely hurt the kobolds. Even though the kobolds were hitting him hard, Seong kept telling himself they wouldn't take him down. But when he saw Lee and Yziel happily taking down monsters with ease, Seong wondered how they managed it so well while he kept getting beaten badly. Eventually, after getting knocked down multiple times, Seong was hurt badly and ended up on the ground, crying and begging for help because he couldn't take it anymore. Just as Seong was crying, he suddenly noticed the attacks had stopped. Looking up, he saw the kobolds that had been beating him were all lying dead. Lee and Yiziel had taken them out. Lee walked over, offered his hand, and joked that had taken over the coattail ride from Seong for a while. He asked how Seong liked the ride with Lee in charge now. Seong smiled broadly, called Lee Big Brother, and shouted happily, grateful Lee had saved him. Lee and Yiziel were both surprised by how quickly Seong's attitude had changed. Right then, the system popped up, announcing they completed the mission. A few moments later, the three returned to the lobby. Seong, remembering what Head done, regretted bowing to Lee and told him He'd serve him from now on. He was annoyed that Head called a newbie like Lee sir. Seong was now level 8, while Lee was only level 2, yet it was Lee who had saved him. Seong worried what would happen if others found out, but, feeling proud, he refused to take back his words and grew irritated again. Lee noticed Seong making some strange faces and thought maybe he needed to use the restroom or something. Yiziel looked around and saw the lobby was empty, so she guessed they might be the first ones to finish the mission. Lee agreed and said it seemed like they finished before anyone else because they had cleverly discovered the kobold's weakness and took them down quickly. Seong was shocked to hear they were actually the first to complete the mission. Yiziel told Lee it wasn't just luck, it was a sharp observation that helped them win first. She said she never would have thought to use the poison from the fruit against the kobolds. Lee gave credit to Yiziel's support, saying it would have been much harder to fight the monsters without her help. Just then, other groups of players started coming through the gate after finishing their missions. Lee told the others it looked like more teams were returning and wondered if they were Junsong's and Juno's groups. He also thought maybe those teams had found the poison apples too and hoped all the other parties would get back to the lobby safely. Just then, a player announced that another team had returned alive and finished their mission. Watching them, Yiziel noticed only 2 players came through the gate and asked what happened to the third. One of the players started crying and admitted that only the 2 of them had made out alive. Right after, an announcement declared that all teams had completed the first level mission. Yiziel quickly pointed out that some players were still missing, and the announcement confirmed that 6 teams had made it back safely, but 8 players hadn't returned at all. Lee was shocked to hear this. He thought it would be tough to survive, but he didn't expect 8 people to die on the very first level. He wondered how many more would perish before reaching the top. Then the announcement said it was calculating rewards for the first mission and that teams who returned in one piece, plus those who finished first, would get 100 gold each. Lee checked and saw he earned 2,000 gold for both bonuses. Though it wasn't a huge amount compared to the tutorial, gold was like insurance for his survival, so Lee was happy to get it. Lee thought to himself that he needed to save as much gold as possible. While he was lost in thought, someone asked which team had finished the mission first. Lee figured he had to admit it now, since the second team already knew his group was first. Just as he was about to speak, Seong stepped forward and boldly claimed their team was the first to complete level 1. He bragged that it was no surprise they won and told everyone not to feel bad about losing. Everyone was shocked to hear Seong's team took first place. Seong noticed their surprise and asked why they doubted him, saying they were just upset they didn't win. The crowd explained it wasn't because of that, but because Lee was on Seong's team, and even though they finished first, Lee was only level 2. They glared at Lee and accused him of getting 2,000 gold for free without doing much, warning him not to get too full of himself. As the group started criticizing Lee, he began to feel annoyed by their harsh words. Just as Yiziel was about to speak up and give Lee credit for their first place finish, Lee quickly stopped her, saying it was pointless because no one would listen anyway. He told her he'd prove it with actions, not just words. Then Junsong stepped forward, urging everyone to calm down and focus on surviving instead of arguing. Junsong, a level 8 archer and one of the strongest players in the area, wasn't alone. CEO Juno, also level 8 and a combat swordsman, agreed with him. Juno added that they needed to keep going for the sake of those who had already fallen. Inspired by their words, the group cheered and encouraged each other, ready to face whatever came next. Suddenly, the blue flames lighting the lobby vanished, replaced by eerie red flames. At that moment, an announcement blared through, warning everyone inside. Confusion spread as nobody knew what was happening. Suddenly, a voice announced that the survival rate for the first level in Region C, 2567, was below average, so a penalty mission was being introduced. Everyone was stunned and confused. How could there be a penalty mission? The announcement continued, saying a death mission would start soon. Each player had to silently pick one person in their mind to take on the deadly task. The player with the most votes would have to face the mission, and they only had 5 minutes to decide. Shock rippled through the group. The announcement warned that if no one was chosen, the players would automatically vote for themselves to take on the death mission. At that moment, everyone realized that being picked meant almost certain death. As everyone panicked, trying to decide who would take on the death mission, Yiziel spoke up, saying that if everyone voted for themselves, maybe no one would have to do it. But someone quickly pointed out that if no one was chosen, they might all end up having to face the mission anyway. Another player warned them to stop arguing because time was running out. Suddenly, a player pointed at Lee and voted for him to take the death mission. Yiziel was shocked, but Lee stayed quiet. Juno stepped forward and apologized to Lee, saying they had no choice but to pick someone. Lee admitted he expected it, but still felt nervous about dying. Juno felt sorry but knew he couldn't help. Yiziel urged everyone again to vote for themselves, hoping to avoid the mission, but Lee interrupted her, saying it probably wouldn't work since trust was already broken. He believed their best chance was to pick one person. As the seconds passed, more and more votes piled up above Lee's head. Lee realized the main reason was obvious. He was the lowest level, making him an easy target. Everyone seemed to have forgotten the idea that the strong should protect the weak. As Lee thought about this, Yiziel stepped forward, her face full of anger, and told the group they were being too heartless. She couldn't believe they'd treat Lee this way. One player asked Yiziel what they were supposed to do if they didn't pick Lee since none of them wanted to die, so voting was necessary. Another player added that it didn't even matter who they chose because Lee was going to die anyway since he was so weak. At that moment, Lee realized everyone's true nature was showing. Their masks had fallen off. Then Seong walked over, smirking as he voted for Lee to take on the death mission. Lee understood then how cruel and real this world called the Tower of the End really was. The timer ran out, and an announcement declared that all votes were in, and the portal to the death mission was opening. Lee stood before the glowing gate, ready to step inside. Seong spoke up, saying that now that Lee was going to die, Seong's problems were solved, and he was glad he had voted for Lee, calling himself a genius for it. Lee thought to himself that he was the chosen sacrifice, the lamb on the altar, surrounded by faces showing a mix of guilt and relief. Still, he had no choice but to face the death mission. But secretly, Lee knew this wasn't the end for him. The guidebook said he had a good chance of clearing the mission, and there was a great reward waiting. He smiled as he walked through the gate, knowing this challenge could actually help him. Back in the lobby, Yiziel sat near Seong, looking worried and sad about Lee. Junsong came over and asked if she was okay, reminding her that even though it was brief, they were still a team who looked out for each other, so it felt painful to be separated from Lee like this. Seong cut off Junsong, saying there was no reason to feel sorry. Lee was just getting what he deserved. Junsong asked Seong to explain what he meant. Seong replied that Lee was a low-level player who only rode on Seong's strength while they were in the same team, basically freeloading off him. Yiziel overheard and challenged Seong, saying it was thanks to Lee's skills that they finished the first mission so easily. Seong snapped back at Yiziel, yelling that Lee had no real skills and just got lucky, only landing the final hit after Seong had weakened the monster. Yiziel was shocked that Seong would lie, knowing perfectly well what really happened. She asked Seong if he truly believed that, because she clearly remembered Lee saving Seong when he almost died. Seong had no answer for that. Thinking quietly to himself, Seong realized Lee had actually killed most of the monsters and started wondering if Lee had some secret ability to fake his level. Suddenly, Seong grew worried. Maybe Lee wasn't really going to fail the death mission after all, and that made him nervous about Lee surviving. Junsong looked at Yiziel and Seong and said he hoped Lee was really as strong as Yiziel believed, because if Lee was, there was a chance he might survive the death mission. Yiziel, with tears in her eyes, remembered Lee's words promising to prove everyone wrong and show them he deserved respect. Wiping her tears away, she told Junsong she trusted Lee and believed he would come back safely. Junsong smiled and said he felt the same. Meanwhile, inside the gate, Lee glanced around and noticed the bodies scattered everywhere where the kobolds he had fought before, which gave him an eerie feeling. Trying to shake it off, he opened his guidebook and thought that if things turned bad, he would have voted for himself to face the death mission. He felt relieved that things seemed to be going his way, even though he was annoyed at Seong for pretending to be friendly during the mission, but then quickly betraying him as soon as he got the chance. The system suddenly announced that the kobold hunting group had returned, and the death mission was about to begin. Lee's task was clear: defeat the angry chieftain and its hunting party, furious over the loss of their tribesmen. Right then, the level 12 chieftain let out a terrifying roar, charging at Lee with all the other kobolds ready to take him down. But Lee wasn't worried. He already knew their secret weakness. Just like the others, the chieftain was vulnerable to poison, and Lee planned to use that to his advantage. Standing before the furious kobolds and their powerful leader, Lee thought it would be impossible for most players to survive this mission. Most would have given up, accepting their fate. But this wasn't any player. It was Lee, and he was ready for the fight. Coating his sword with the poisonous juice from the apples, Lee sliced through the charging kobolds one by one without much trouble. As he wiped his blade clean, Lee realized the real challenge was still ahead. The kobold chieftain was the only one left standing between him and victory. Lee charged straight at the chieftain boss, eager to see how tough this final enemy really was. He swung his sword, but the chieftain skillfully blocked the strike, pulling back just enough to reduce the blow. Lee was shocked. He hadn't expected a monster to have such a smart defense. Just as Lee was impressed by the chieftain's strength, it suddenly turned and ran, leaving Lee stunned that the boss was actually fleeing from him. As Lee chased the panicked chieftain, he couldn't help but feel disappointed. A boss running away like this seemed weak, and Lee thought the mission might end quicker than expected. Swinging his sword again, Lee believed the death mission was more like an easy bonus round that anyone could finish. But just when Lee tried to land the final hit, his sword suddenly couldn't cut through the chieftain's body anymore, catching him completely off guard. The chieftain then stared up at the full moon, and something inside it seemed to awaken. Without warning, it struck back hard, slashing Lee across the right shoulder with a powerful attack. In the lobby, Seong stood with a big ego and told everyone that since Lee was already dead, there was nothing to worry about. He claimed he would carry the whole group through the floors alone. Yiziel ignored Seong's boasting and quietly prayed for Lee's safe return. Annoyed, Seong snapped at her, saying it was pointless to pray for someone who was gone. Furious, Yiziel scolded Seong, telling him he should at least have some heart, even if the world was falling apart. Seong was caught off guard by her words. Yiziel then asked him what he would do if Lee actually came back alive, but Seong quickly cut her off, insisting Lee had no chance of surviving the death mission. As the two argued, Yiziel suddenly spotted movement by the portal. Everyone turned to see a figure stepping through, and it was Lee. Junsong looked stunned, while Juno grinned with relief to see Lee alive. Just then, an announcement declared that Lee had survived the death mission and returned safely. Smiling, Lee told everyone proudly that he had made it back alive and well. Just moments before, Lee was badly hurt, a deep slash across his chest from the chieftain, leaving him close to death with barely any health left. He knew he had to stop the bleeding quickly and land one final strike to kill the chieftain, but he wasn't sure how. When the chieftain swung a strong attack at him, Lee barely managed to dodge, struggling to stay on his feet. Then, an idea hit him. He realized that while a sword might not cut through a solid wall, even a small nail can pierce it. Lee understood he had been thinking about his sword only for slashing, but it could be used differently. Deciding to try a new move, Lee planned to use the chieftain's own force against it. As the monster charged, Lee would combine its momentum with his own weight to drive his sword straight through the chieftain's body. When the attack came, Lee focused all his power into one point and pushed forward. His sword pierced through the chieftain, killing it instantly. Right after, the system popped up, telling Lee that he had learned a new skill called stabbing added to his level 2 swordsmanship, and congratulated him for finishing the death mission. Back in the lobby, Yiziel saw Lee return alive and immediately rushed to hug him. But Seong suddenly pushed her aside in panic and grabbed Lee instead. Seong, overwhelmed, confessed he had always believed Lee would survive the death mission. Both Lee and Yiziel were baffled by Seong's sudden change in behavior. Seong, still nervous, admitted that even a deadly mission couldn't stop Lee, the strongest person around, from coming back. Lee felt annoyed by Seong's act and wanted to teach him a lesson, but held back. Then, a player stepped forward and asked if Lee had truly completed the mission. He said he was glad Lee was safe, but was surprised that Lee's level was still stuck at 2 despite supposedly finishing such a tough challenge. Others started doubting if Lee really cleared the mission or if it was just like the earlier event with the hologram rabbit. Lee's mind drifted back to his past, remembering how the world seemed determined to keep the weak down. He recalled how in school, even though he worked hard and scored top marks, no one believed him. Instead, they accused him of cheating and called him a pathetic orphan. Even now, people didn't trust Lee. They believed he must have hidden somewhere safe until time ran out, finishing the mission without really trying. One player said it made sense because someone as low level as Lee couldn't possibly fight well, so he must have just gotten lucky. Hearing this, Lee realized that some people's minds don't change easily, and though he was angry, he chose to stay calm and not react. Just as Lee was about to speak, Yiziel stepped forward and told everyone to stop gossiping and doubting Lee's skills since he had already proven himself by surviving the death mission. Watching Yiziel, Seong suddenly jumped in and agreed with her. He said they had failed to celebrate the great return of Lee, the strongest player around, and instead, they spoiled the mood and lost their heads. Lee looked at Seong, confused by his sudden behavior, thinking Seong was the craziest person there. Still, Lee smiled quietly, feeling a bit comforted knowing some people were truly on his side. Lee thought to himself that no matter what others thought of him, He wanted everyone to survive in the tower. To make that happen, he needed to prove something important to them. So, Lee spoke up and said he had something to show. Then, he pulled out a bright red sword called the Indomitable Sword, a rare weapon that boosted attack power by 15%. Everyone was shocked to see Lee had such a powerful sword. They felt like he had a secret cheat. Junsong said he was surprised Lee still had the poison apples and admitted Lee really was as impressive as Yziel said. Lee just shrugged and said it was all luck. Junsong then said that the rare and powerful sword Lee had gotten was way more useful for surviving than just gaining experience points. But Lee reminded them all that they almost let him die, which made everyone suddenly nervous. Juno stepped forward and agreed with Lee, admitting that he had tried to excuse their actions by thinking sending Lee to the death mission was necessary. But deep down, Juno knew it was selfish. They only cared about saving themselves and didn't think about Lee. Even though they all realized that picking the lowest level player, Lee, was basically condemning him, they still pushed him into danger just to protect themselves. Juno bowed his head deeply to Lee, apologizing for everything he and the others had done. With tears in his eyes, he said how relieved he was that Lee had survived. As Lee watched Juno's sincere apology, another player named Co. Eun-jin suddenly cut in, telling Juno he didn't need to go that far because someone had to be chosen anyway. She added that Lee came back alive with a rare item, so things had turned out okay after all. Juno got angry hearing that and snapped at Eun-jin, asking how she could say such a thing to Lee. He told her she should at least feel some guilt for what they put Lee through. Eun-jin just smiled and shot back that Juno had no right to judge since he had also voted for Lee to take the death mission. Right then, Lee stepped between them, interrupting the argument. He said he wasn't bringing up the past to blame anyone, but to prevent it from happening again. Lee warned everyone that during the voting, the tower was clearly trying to create division, sowing distrust and conflict among them, probably just to watch them fall apart. Everyone was stunned by Lee's words, and he quickly added that his survival was a chance for all of them. He said that by making it through, he had shown that they could go against the tower's plans if they stuck together. Junsong then asked if Lee had any plans moving forward. Lee answered that he would find a way to help as many people survive as possible, and they would keep climbing the tower, step by step, higher and higher, until one day they could all return to their normal lives. Hearing this, everyone agreed and felt inspired to face the challenges ahead as a team. Yziel added that to make this happen, everyone had to unite and support each other, and the group nodded in agreement. Juno quietly admired Lee, thinking he was kind-hearted to say that even after being betrayed by them. Juno also realized they shouldn't have judged Lee just because of his low level. Suddenly, Kumkum appeared and interrupted, announcing that their next mission would be a survival game. Everyone was shocked to see him, as they thought he had left for good. One player joked that Kumkum must be back to hand out stat points again. Lee asked Kumkum what exactly a survival game meant, and Kumkum explained that the level 2 mission would take place among the 15 players in the lobby, and it would be a battle royale. Everyone was shocked to hear this. Seeing their reactions, Kumkum quickly reassured them that since it was just a low-level mission, it would be a gentle challenge, so they didn't need to be too worried and told them to stay positive. Then, Kumkum went on to explain the rules. He said the level 2 mission would have 16 real players and 16 doppelgangers, making 32 participants in total. Their goal was to eliminate all the doppelgangers. Kumkum warned that the doppelgangers would have the same stats and even the same memories, so spotting them wouldn't be easy. The most important rule was number 3. Players wouldn't get any rewards for killing doppelgangers, but if they killed another player, they would earn stat points and gold as a reward. Kumkum explained that this mission was really a chance for everyone to level up, but as soon as he said that, the group disagreed. They felt Kumkum was just telling them to fight and kill each other. To make things worse, Kumkum warned that if nobody made a kill within 30 minutes, they would all be pulled back to the lobby to face a huge disaster. Right then, he summoned a giant monster of unknown strength right in front of them. Everyone froze, shocked by the terrifying creature. The monster immediately unleashed a massive attack, but the players dodged just in time. Still, the power of that single attack left everyone stunned and scared. One hit from the monster could easily end their lives. Fear spread quickly among the players. One of them couldn't believe they were expected to fight such a beast after barely making it through the first floor. Panic took over the group, and no one knew what to do next. Watching all this, Lee realized things were getting worse. Everyone was too scared and tense, making it even harder for them to work as a team. Just then, the monster swung a heavy punch at one of the players, who froze in terror, unable to react. At that moment, Lee jumped in and saved the player just in time. The saved player was grateful and thanked Lee, but Lee was puzzled. Why was the monster attacking before the second level mission even began? Then it hit him. The monster was putting on a show, trying to scare everyone and make them take the upcoming mission seriously. Lee figured this was just a warning, and the monster didn't really want to hurt them. But suddenly, the monster slammed a powerful blow that sent 3 players flying and hurt them badly. Lee was confused and couldn't understand what was going on anymore. When the others tried to fight back, their attacks barely scratched the monster. No matter how many times they struck, it made no difference. Lee was annoyed. He had thought the monster's first attack was just for show, but now it seemed like the monster was actually trying to kill them before the mission even started. Yahello shouted to Lee that her mana was almost gone, and soon she wouldn't be able to heal the injured players anymore. Lee noticed that no one had died yet, but he knew this couldn't last much longer if things kept going like this. Just then, the monster was about to launch a huge attack, but Lee told everyone to move back. He was going to take care of it. Juno warned Lee to stay away from the monster, but Lee thought to himself that there was no time to worry about what others thought. If he didn't stop that attack now, everyone would die. Gathering all his remaining strength, Lee used his indomitable sword and his stabbing skill together, pouring all his energy into one massive strike that completely destroyed the monster. Everyone was stunned by what they saw, and even Lee was amazed at what he had just done. Cheers broke out as the monster was finally defeated, but Lee started wondering if his sword was really that powerful. Just then, the system appeared and warned Lee that he would be exhausted for 3 minutes because he had pushed his body beyond its limits. Without any energy left, Lee collapsed right away. 3 minutes later, the system announced that Lee's exhaustion was over, and Lee slowly woke up. Everyone was gathered around him, worried but also amazed at what he had just done to the monster. Juno wiped tears from his eyes and told Lee he couldn't believe how humble Lee was, even though he was so strong. Juno also joked that Lee's fainting at the end was like a perfect performance. Lee stood up and asked what had happened to him and the monster they had been fighting. Just then, Kum appeared, excitedly explaining that the monster had been sent away. He said the attack was just a warning to show them what would happen if they didn't follow the mission's rules. Lee realized the monster was only there to scare them into paying attention. Kum then said it wasn't very thrilling since everyone was acting too friendly, even though they almost died moments ago. He added with a wicked grin that since someone had to be killed every 30 minutes, the person standing next to you could be your killer. Everyone grew nervous, scared by Kum's words. Kum smiled and said it had shared its warning, and now it was time to leave. With a cheerful wave, it said goodbye to everyone. Lee felt angry that the monster had been so obvious about its plans right in front of them. He wondered if there was anything they could do to change the situation. After a moment, Juno spoke up, saying if they couldn't find the doppelgangers soon, they'd end up killing each other, which he really wanted to avoid. Another player agreed, saying they needed a quick solution. Then Lee stepped forward with an idea. Everyone should mark each other, so they could tell who was who. One player questioned this, pointing out that since the doppelgangers had the same memories, how would marking them help? After thinking for a bit, Lee said he had a plan to get them through the mission. Curious, everyone asked what it was. Lee then announced that he would be the one to hunt down and kill all the doppelgangers himself. Everyone was stunned when Lee made his bold announcement. He explained that they shouldn't do anything on their own, but instead gather at the highest spot on the second floor. He warned that if anyone else started killing, that person was probably a doppelganger, and they should all team up to take them down. A player named on Secheng, who was level 9, asked Lee if that was really his entire plan. Eunjin then spoke up, saying she knew Lee was skilled despite his low level, but she didn't understand why they had to blindly follow his plan. Lee looked at Eunjin and reminded her about what Kum had told them earlier, that killing doppelgangers gave no rewards, but killing other players gave stats and gold. He pointed out that although the mission said to fight doppelgangers, the tower's true goal was to force them to turn on each other. Lee said he was done being tricked by the tower and believed his plan was the best way to handle this mess. Eunjin asked how that could be the best choice, but before she could say more, Junsong cut in and said he agreed with Lee's idea. Junsong spoke up, telling everyone that following Lee's plan would definitely help them avoid a lot of harm. Eunjin was caught off guard by Junsong's confidence. Junsong then said, seriously looking at Lee, that since Lee wanted to handle all the doppelganger hunting himself, it must mean Lee had a way to tell players and doppelgangers apart. Lee smiled and admitted he did have a method to tell them apart. Soon after, an announcement rang out. The second floor mission was starting, and they had to kill at least one person within 30 minutes. At that exact moment, someone moved ahead, and it was none other than Seong, who was grumbling to himself about why they were supposed to do nothing except climb to the highest spot and why he even bothered following Lee's orders in the first place. Suddenly, a faint sound reached his ears, and he quickly slipped behind a tree as approaching footsteps drew closer. Just as Seong tensed up, ready to strike whoever it was, a familiar voice called out to him, revealing it was Lee. Lee casually remarked that Seong's shoulders were far wider than the tree he was trying to hide behind, and Seong immediately relaxed, smiling in relief and saying he was glad it was the boss. In the very next instant, before that relief could fade, Lee coldly cut Seong straight down the middle without a hint of hesitation or regret. Only moments before all of this, the second mission had officially begun. Lee checked his guidebook, which told him he was the first player to reach a certain level of sensitivity. Because of that, he earned a new skill called Impeccable Senses, which would help him spot doppelgangers. Lee felt relieved. He had been a little nervous after claiming he could tell players from doppelgangers, and this skill showed up just in time. Though happy to get the skill, Lee felt a bit regretful too, since he had to spend a lot of his stat points to unlock it. After investing a lot of his stats into sensitivity, Lee finally raised it to level 50 and unlocked the skill called Impeccable Senses. This skill sharpened all of Lee's senses to an incredible level, allowing him to gather detailed info about anyone nearby within a certain range. Lee felt thrilled. He had spent nearly half his gold to get this, but now everything around him seemed clearer, like his world had a brand new filter. Feeling great, Lee focused his enhanced senses and soon heard a voice far off. Squinting into the distance, he saw Seong walking toward him. Lee was amazed he could hear Seong so clearly, even though Seong was about 500 meters away. But then, a terrible smell hit Lee's nose, and he quickly covered his mouth, almost gagging from the awful stench. Looking closer, Lee realized right away that Seong wasn't the real player at all. He was a doppelganger. Right after, the system popped up and told Lee had just killed one of the doppelgangers. 15 doppelgangers and 16 players were left. It reminded him again that each player had to kill someone within 30 minutes. Lee realized the doppelganger acted so real until the very end, and he felt a little bad about killing it. But he pushed those thoughts aside, glad that now he could clearly tell who was real thanks to his new skill. Lee hoped everyone else was following his plan too. Lee felt relieved that everyone had agreed to follow his plan, especially after Junsong supported it. Still, he couldn't shake off his worry. Anything could happen at any moment. He just hoped everyone would make it safely to a high point on the map before trouble struck. Just as Lee finished speaking, a system alert rang out announcing a player's death, and the message left him stunned, his mind instantly racing as he questioned whether the doppelgangers had begun slaughtering players or if another human was behind it. With Seong's name surfacing as a troubling possibility he couldn't ignore. Yet no matter how much he thought, he realized there was no way to learn the truth on the spot. So abandoning hesitation, Lee sprinted ahead, convinced that finding the killer quickly was the only option left to him. And to gain a better view, he scaled a towering tree and swept his gaze across the terrain, where he soon spotted a motionless body sprawled on the ground with a lone figure standing beside it. And the moment he recognized the figure as a doppelganger, Lee leapt down and rushed in without pause, striking it down before it could react, triggering another announcement declaring the doppelganger's death, which made Lee release a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, thankful he had arrived in time to stop further bloodshed. And after offering a brief prayer for the fallen player, something caught his attention as he inspected the doppelganger's weapon, because it didn't align with the fatal wound at all, which had clearly been made by an arrow. And as that realization settled in, Lee noticed Junsong standing far away, bow drawn, and aimed straight ahead. Lee immediately slipped behind the tree, his thoughts spiraling as he wondered if there was yet another attacker lurking nearby. And when he focused on the figure in the distance, he quickly realized it was a player with an arrow embedded in his back, making Lee question whether that injury had been caused by the doppelganger instead. So he cautiously called out to Junsong and asked if he was still alive, then warned him to stop moving. But Junsong, clearly shaken, replied that although he didn't want out Lee, he had no way to confirm whether Lee was human or a doppelganger. So he insisted they keep their distance for safety, to which Lee responded that killing the doppelganger right in front of him should be more than enough proof. And after a brief pause filled with tension, Junsong finally accepted his words, only to suddenly lose strength and collapse, forcing Lee to rush over and panic to check on him. And after they steadied themselves and began moving again, Junsong apologized with a heavy voice, blaming himself for letting the doppelganger escape earlier and believing that his mistake had led to others losing their lives, admitting how terrifying it was to know something wearing his face was harming innocent people. But Lee firmly reassured him that none of it was his fault and that everyone trapped here was merely a victim of the tower. telling him their only priority now was surviving and escaping. When Lee suddenly sensed movement and spotted two figures approaching, revealing themselves as Juno and Yiziel, who looked relieved to see them safe and immediately expressed their concern after hearing that two players had already died. And as Yiziel stepped forward and offered to heal Junsong, Lee abruptly moved in front of him and ordered Junsong to step back, declaring that the two standing before them were doppelgangers, causing Yiziel and Juno to freeze in shock for a heartbeat before their expressions twisted and they openly revealed their true nature. The pair didn't hesitate for even a second and lunged straight at Lee, while Juno spoke with a twisted smile, saying it saddened him and asking whether Lee was still upset about how things had turned out earlier, as Junsong, standing nearby, calmly declared that he would handle the remaining doppelganger himself. Yet despite the chaos, Lee's thoughts raced as he questioned why the doppelgangers would confront him so boldly, especially Yiziel, who carried memories and should have known exactly how dangerous Lee truly was. And while the two kept pressing him without pause, Lee was suddenly snapped out of his thoughts when an arrow shot toward him at high speed, which he narrowly avoided, though the tip grazed his face and drew a thin line of blood. And just then a mocking voice echoed through the area, lamenting that it was a shame because he had believed the situation was already checkmate, a voice that unmistakably belonged to Junsong, who now stood grinning cruelly with his bow aimed directly at Lee. As the two doppelgangers quickly fell back to his side, and all three locked their gazes on Lee at once, revealing that earlier, right after Lee had killed a doppelganger, someone had been secretly watching him from afar, and that observer had been Junsong himself, because everything up to this point had been a carefully laid trap, one Lee had walked into completely, with the arrow lodged in Junsong's back being self-inflicted to sell the act, and with a casual apology for getting a little carried away. Junsong smoothly changed the subject and asked Lee what he was feeling now, betrayal, helplessness, or rage, before breaking into unsettling laughter that rang through the clearing. At that instant, Junsong was caught off guard by sudden laughter echoing through the clearing, laughter that came from Lee himself, and Lee calmly spoke up, saying he had been wondering how long Junsong planned to keep pretending, adding that Junsong seemed far more unhinged than he had expected, which made Junsong scoff and accuse Lee of acting as if he had known the truth from the very beginning, only for Lee to flash a confident grin and explain that he could see every player's status window, openly labeling Junsong as a murderer, causing Junsong to fall silent for a brief moment before remarking that this revelation made things interesting, asking if the tower had granted Lee such an ability and admitting his envy. But Lee cut him off, saying he was tired of pointless chatter, then bluntly questioned why Junsong was doing all this and whether gold and stats truly mattered enough to justify killing real people. To which Junsong casually replied that he didn't need a reason at all, claiming that in this beautiful world, killing brought no punishment but instead generous rewards. And with a twisted smile, he loosed another arrow at Lee while admitting he could no longer restrain himself after learning that truth, as Lee briefly wondered if something deeper had driven Junsong to this point before rejecting that thought entirely, concluding that Junsong had simply worn a mask until now and was nothing more than a bloodthirsty lunatic. And, as the battle fully erupted between the two sides, Lee quickly found himself under heavy pressure while facing all three at once, realizing that Junsong still hadn't revealed everything he was capable of, making the fight even harder, especially because of their formation. A healer backing them up, an archer attacking from afar, and a close-range fighter pressing him nonstop, left Lee with almost no room to breathe or counter. Lee spoke up calmly, saying he didn't know how Junsong had managed to get the doppelgangers on his side, but was clear that Junsong had planned everything thoroughly, to which Junsong replied that landing a valuable target required this level of preparation, admitting that Lee was far stronger than expected and claiming that this only made things better, since he could now slowly enjoy watching Lee suffer before dying. And as Junsong prepared to strike again, he ordered the doppelgangers to move in. Yet, the moment all three rushed forward, Lee activated his heightened senses and instantly grasped how perfectly their roles were synchronized, though he scoffed at the idea, believing that teamwork meant nothing when faced with absolute power. And with a decisive swing, Lee sliced through one doppelganger. Then, as the second tried to heal, Lee severed her arm mid-action and finished her off without hesitation, prompting the system to announce the deaths of two doppelgangers at once, which caused Junsong to completely lose his composure as he suddenly dropped to his knees, shocking Lee. And with tears welling in his eyes, Junsong begged for mercy, claiming that greed had consumed him, that he had lost himself chasing rewards, grown impatient after witnessing Lee's strength, and crossed a line he never should have approached, pleading desperately to be forgiven just this once. but in the very next heartbeat, Junsong attempted a surprise attack, only for it to fail, instantly as Lee had already anticipated it. And without pausing for even a moment, Lee ended Junsong's life, turning the hunter who had carefully laid his trap into the very prey he once sought to capture. At that moment, a system alert flashed, announcing the death of another player, and Lee stood frozen, silently coming to terms with the fact that he had just ended the life of an actual human, when suddenly red text filled his vision, informing him that the player who had accepted the role of Star Killer was now dead, and that Lee had been chosen as the replacement, a revelation that left him completely shaken. And before he could fully grasp it, the system explained that accepting the title would grant him powerful stat boosts along with the loyalty of nearby doppelgangers. Yet Lee remained stunned, barely aware of his surroundings, until a presence manifested before him, causing him to tense as he questioned who this figure could be. And then a strikingly beautiful woman appeared, extending her hand and calmly asking whether he wished to accept the offer, which only deepened Lee's confusion as everything began to click, making him realize that this was exactly how Junsong had gained control over the doppelgangers. And although Lee set that thought aside and examined the rewards being offered, he couldn't deny how tempting and overwhelmingly generous they were. But as he reflected more carefully, Lee admitted to himself that while killing doppelgangers hadn't weighed heavily on him since they weren't truly human, the tower would eventually force him into battles against real people, possibly even other Star Killers. And despite understanding the advantages and the danger ahead, Lee made his choice, firmly rejecting the challenge with unwavering resolve, declaring that no matter what, he refused to walk the same twisted path as Junsong or become a deranged monster obsessed with murder. A short while later, Lee finally arrived at the meeting point and found the rest of the group already waiting, and almost immediately, Seong popped up in front of him with an overly cute expression, complaining about why Lee had taken so long, which made Lee briefly wonder if life would be easier if he just snapped and eliminated Seong on the spot. But pushing that thought aside, Lee praised everyone for their efforts and thanked them for trusting and following his plan, only for the players to quickly ask what their next move should be and whether Lee truly had the ability to tell doppelgangers apart. And just as Lee was about to answer, another voice suddenly echoed out, politely thanking everyone for gathering there, a voice Lee instantly recognized as his own, belonging to none other than his doppelganger, causing panic to spread through the group as people froze, unsure which Lee they were supposed to believe, some even asking if this situation had also been part of Lee's prediction, while the two identical figures stood facing each other in silence. And inside, the real Lee grimly acknowledged that things had become far more complicated than planned, remembering that this exact outcome was why he had wanted to deal with the doppelganger earlier, only for everything to fall apart due to an unforeseen factor, Junsong's interference. And as the two Lees locked eyes, Lee realized this had turned into a mental battle, a chess game where one wrong move could doom him. Just as one of the players nervously asked Lee to explain everything, questioning whether he had truly killed the doppelgangers as promised, and demanding to know exactly who among them were real and who were not. Lee quickly ran through the facts in his head, realizing that 8 individuals in total were now tied to either a fallen doppelganger or a dead player, and that if he openly named the 5 doppelgangers he had personally eliminated, their identities would be exposed without room for doubt, which meant that proving this alone should have been enough to confirm that he was the real player. Yet a serious flaw appeared immediately, because both Lee and his double possessed the same knowledge about which players and doppelgangers had died. And when they spoke at the same time with identical answers, the crowd was left stunned by how perfectly their statements matched, and while the Real Lee was still searching for a way out of this mess, the doppelgangers seized the initiative, urging everyone to think logically as he began laying out his own explanation for why he was the genuine Lee. And as the group listened to his confident reasoning, doubt slowly crept in, causing some to waver and question their beliefs, even though a few still remained unconvinced and watched the two Lees with growing unease. The doppelganger kept talking, explaining that according to the other Lee, the Junsong standing with them was a fake, which could only mean that the real Junsong had already been killed by Lee himself. He reminded everyone that Junsong had been the highest level player among them, the one who had pushed them forward and acted like their leader, so the idea that the strongest person there had died so easily was hard to swallow. With a sharp tone, the doppelganger ended by asking whether anyone could truly place their trust in someone who had already murdered a teammate. At once, murmurs spread through the group as players argued among themselves, while the doppelganger Lee silently felt relieved, since he had no idea how the real Junsong died, but was happy the crowd was leaning his way. Seizing the moment, he suddenly pointed straight at Lee and declared that Lee was the real doppelganger. The players responded that they had heard enough and insisted they should deal with the fake Lee immediately before more doppelgangers were killed. Seong objected at once, saying that doing so would also label him as fake, which he clearly wasn't, and Yizil backed him up, arguing that they couldn't decide anything without listening to both Lees first. Juno also agreed, whamming everyone to proceed carefully, but others pushed back, saying there was no time left since the catastrophe would arrive within minutes. Throughout it all, Lee stayed silent, calmly observing, and deep down he admitted that his doppelganger had played this situation impressively, choosing almost the perfect move to corner him. Lee suddenly stepped forward and broke the tension, calmly agreeing that the doppelganger was correct and openly admitting that he was the one who had killed the real Junsong. Hearing that, the doppelganger sneered and asked if Lee had finally surrendered, saying it was disappointing to see him give up so easily. Inside, though, Lee knew there was a truth his double had completely missed, and without hesitating, he drew his sword and shouted that Junsong had been a traitor who had been murdering players from the very start. As those words left his mouth, Lee swung his blade straight through Junsong's body, instantly throwing his doppelganger into panic at the sight. Eunji cried out in shock as Junsong was cut down, while the doppelganger, furious and flustered, pulled out his weapon and demanded to know what Lee thought he was doing, accusing Gin of acting wildly because he was cornered. Before the chaos could explode further, a firm voice cut through the noise, telling everyone to stop, and it was Juno, who then turned to Lee and asked him to explain exactly what he meant when he called Junsong a traitor. He realized that if Lee was right, then the one attacking was the real Lee. Juno also saw that by gathering everyone together, Lee had cleverly put the players in control, because if a doppelganger killed someone, they immediately showed their true nature, stopping them from being reckless. Juno thought to himself that if Lee could tell who the doppelgangers were, he could easily prove he was the real Lee by killing one of them. But Juno was still confused about why Lee called Junsong a traitor. So, he raised his voice and asked Lee if Junsong really had killed people. Lee nodded and said Juno was right. Junsong was like a demon hiding behind a mask of kindness, waiting for the right moment to strike. Hearing this, Eunji got angry because Junsong had always helped her. She shouted at Lee, asking how he could insult Junsong like that, then swung her sword at Lee, vowing she wouldn't forgive him. But just as she attacked, an arrow suddenly pierced her back, shot by none other than Junsong himself, the person she trusted the most. Eunji fell to the ground, and the system announced that a player had died. Now, there were only 12 players left and 11 doppelgangers. Everyone was shocked by what happened. Lee was surprised too. He hadn't expected the doppelganger to still be strong after Lee had slashed him. Then, Junsong's doppelganger laughed loudly, saying he loved seeing their shocked faces. But before he could celebrate, Secheng sneaked behind him and struck him down. The doppelganger died instantly, and the system announced that one of them was gone. Secheng apologized to Lee for doubting him and asked what their next move should be. Lee was caught off guard by Secheng's change of heart. Meanwhile, another player was shocked to learn that Junsong was a doppelganger, which made it impossible to know who the real Lee was. Suddenly, all the doppelgangers drew their swords, ready to fight the real players. The players looked to Lee, asking what to do next, and promising to follow his orders. Lee felt a wave of deja vu wash over him, and decided it was time to share his final plan with everyone. Just as he began to speak, Lee's doppelganger appeared behind him and declared that it was now do or die. It swung its sword at Lee, who managed to block the blow. While battling his double, Lee said he planned to take all the gold from the doppelganger to boost his own strength, and that the same fate awaited the others. As Lee spoke, the real players launched a strong attack, overpowering their doppelgangers easily since they had all grown stronger than the day before. After a while, the players managed to defeat all the doppelgangers. As they caught their breath, Lee thought about how lucky they were. The doppelgangers had the same stats as when they first arrived on the second floor, but since the players had boosted their stats with gold, they finished the mission without losing anyone else. Meanwhile, Secheng was visibly angry and frustrated, blaming Junsong for the deaths. He told Lee that if it weren't for that traitor, they could have made it through without losing anyone. Lee realized Secheng was especially upset because he had been in a team with Junsong. Lee himself felt disappointed too, since his goal was to clear the floors safely with no casualties. Lee then thought about the other groups in different regions. They probably didn't have someone like him with a guidebook, so they might face even worse challenges and more star killers like Junsong. He knew the battles ahead would get tougher, but he believed his special ability to read the guide was meant for a reason. Even though some experiences had been harsh, Lee felt determined to protect as many people as possible, especially those who trusted him. At that moment, Secheng thanked Li, saying he only survived because of him. Li smiled and replied that it was actually everyone's teamwork that made it possible. Secheng looked at Li and said, "You're still level 2 even after doing so much, so you must have a special ability that's slowing your leveling down." Li was surprised that Secheng had figured it out so quickly. He thought to himself that Secheng's careful thinking and good judgment would be really helpful going forward. Then, Secheng bowed deeply and sincerely apologized for doubting Li and underestimating him. One by one, the other players also bowed and said sorry to Li. Li looked a bit uncomfortable and told them there was no need to apologize. Just then, Seong burst out laughing and joked that everyone else was bad at spotting talent, and that they should have been like him, jumping on Li's fast track from the start. Right after, Yizil stepped forward and said she was actually the first to see how amazing Li was. Juno added, wiping tears, that he also wanted to apologize again. Li felt a mix of frustration and amusement hearing all this. Secheng then spoke again, admitting it might sound bold after everything, but he asked Li to take charge and lead them from now on. Li was caught off guard for a moment, but soon smiled and agreed to Secheng's suggestion. After a short wait, the system began calculating how much gold each player earned based on their effort. When the results were out, everyone cheered happily at the gold they received. Seong couldn't help but boast loudly that he got 2,000 gold coins, showing off to everyone. Watching this, Li thought to himself that since everyone followed his plan, they all ended up with some gold, which made him happy. But what really excited Li was that he earned a huge 12,500 gold coins for contributing the most. While checking his shop, Li got a system notification saying that because he had more than 10,000 gold coins, his shop rank had gone up, unlocking more items to buy. Li realized this was how the system worked. To get rare items, he needed a higher rank shop. He decided to focus on buying skill-up items. Just then, Li's skill level 4 skill-up jumped to level 3, and his basic swordsmanship improved too. Li thought back to when he had used a higher level sword skill without realizing it, but had passed out right after. Now, knowing he could buy that powerful skill for just 5,000 gold, Li felt it was an amazing deal for such strength. After finishing his shopping, Li spotted Yizil nearby and quickly handed her 1,200 gold coins. Yizil was surprised and asked why he gave her so much, but Li just smiled and said she deserved it. He reminded her how tough their battles against the kobolds and doppelgangers would have been without her. Li added that in a world where survival meant taking lives, it was because of Yizil's kindness and support that they could still trust and help each other. Hearing this, Yizil's eyes filled with tears, and she promised to get stronger to protect everyone. Right then, her healing skill leveled up. Li also gave Seong 200 gold coins, which confused Seong at first. Li told him to stop messing around and to keep up the good work. Li thought Seong was getting pretty capable and could be useful if he helped him grow stronger, but it was best not to make enemies of annoying people. Suddenly, a beam of light shone from Seong, who turned around with a cute, almost tearful expression, saying, "Anything you wish is my command." Li, seeing this, felt a burst of anger and was tempted to test his new level 3 basic sword skill on Seong right then and there. After a short while, everyone arrived on the 3rd floor and the new mission kicked off. The system announced that this mission was a siege battle, where they would face players from different regions for the first time. Their goal was to destroy the castle and take control of the altar located on the 3rd floor. They had 24 hours to complete it, but the system didn't say what would happen if they failed. Once the announcement ended, everyone received a return crystal, a special item that could only be used on the 3rd floor and only for a limited time. One player quickly asked if they had to fight and kill others, while another wondered what the return crystal was used for. As everyone took in the news, Li suddenly noticed something important. He quickly called out to Seong, reminding him about Seong's promise to do anything for Li. Li drew his sword, and Seong's face instantly showed fear. Moments later, Seong was sprinting uphill, muttering to himself that Li was being too intense and that he could have just talked to him instead. Seong thought Li could have reassured him that dying wouldn't be permanent. But Li already knew this from his guidebook. It said that if a player died on the 3rd floor, the return crystal would teleport them back to the start. Seong suddenly remembered that Li had promised him 100 gold coins if he went ahead to scout for the team. Feeling pumped, Seong stood in front of the big door and shouted that he was ready to smash everything on the 3rd floor. He started hitting the door with powerful punches, and the system notified him that the castle gate's durability was dropping little by little with each hit. After a final strong punch, the gate finally burst open. But just then, the system warned Seong that the gate would reset in 2 seconds, and sure enough, it snapped back to its full strength. Confident, Seong stepped inside, thinking no gate could hold him back. Looking around, he spotted 2 guards watching from the castle walls and about 10 people standing near the altar in the distance. He remembered Lee telling him not to kill anyone there or else the others would figure out the return crystal secret. But Seong thought the people in front of him were just weaklings afraid of him. He told himself he was going to crush them all. Before he could act, a sudden powerful strike hit Seong's face hard, making blood drip down, shocking him instantly. Seong lay on the ground, stunned and confused about what had just hit him. Looking up, he saw someone aiming a gun right at him, and in the next instant, he was dead. A short while later, Seong came back to the group and told them everything that happened. Lee was shocked to hear there was someone with a gun, and Seong added that the bullets were magical and caused serious pain. Lee thought the whole situation was insane. Guns weren't supposed to be available yet. Even Secheng, who was a soldier, didn't have one. But then Lee considered another possibility. Maybe the person had earned a legendary weapon as a reward from the second floor Star Killer mission, which granted special gear to those who completed it. Lee was thinking the fight ahead would be really tough when Yziel suddenly grabbed his shoulders and told him not to worry. She had his back. Right then, the other players also spoke up, promising they were behind him too. Seeing their support made Lee smile, and he raised his voice to explain the plan they would follow. Later that night, inside the castle, a man was kneeling and on the verge of tears while a woman sat on him like he was a chair. The rest of the players stood frozen, too scared to move. Meanwhile, Lee stayed far from the castle, thinking about the great advantage his impeccable senses skill gave him. Using it, he spotted 2 guards on the castle walls near the gate. As Lee scanned the area, Seong walked past and shouted at the guards, greeting them like old foes. Yziel warned Lee that if Seong went back, the enemies might figure out the return crystal's power, but Lee said the enemies would only guess. It was more likely they'd think Seong alone had that ability. Suddenly, the 2 guards fired arrows at Seong. Seong was caught off guard since things were different from his first visit. Just then, Lee appeared and sliced all the arrows in half. He told Yziel that the enemies didn't fully understand how Seong could come back from death, so they now had a chance to strike. Lee jumped up on his Seong's shoulders and launched himself toward the guards. As he got close, he slashed their chests, seriously wounding them. Juno reminded everyone that the enemies would soon figure out the return crystal after their first failed attack, so they needed to act fast and finish this quickly. Seong shouted for everyone to rush the castle, saying this was their moment. He bragged he could break the gate with just 5 punches and told the group to stay close because the gate would shut if they took too long. But right as Seong prepared a powerful hit, a bullet fired through the door hit him in the chest again. The system then announced the gate was broken beyond repair. Yziel healed Seong and urged him to stay strong. Lee was shocked, but as he looked around, one of the injured guards on the ground warned Lee, saying he didn't understand why Lee spared them, but that mercy would cost their lives. The guard warned Lee that if he stayed so kind, the woman with the gun would definitely take advantage of him. Curious, Lee quickly used his skill to check her stats. He was shocked when he saw her name, Sun Seoyen, and even more surprised to find out she was a star killer. She was already level 13, which made Lee wonder if she had wiped out everyone on the second floor. Before he could think more, Seoyen fired her gun at him, hitting his shoulder and causing serious pain. Lee quickly ducked behind cover and gulped down a healing potion. He was stunned that she could shoot so accurately from such a long distance. Realizing how dangerous she was, Lee felt grateful head prepared by wearing Kala's leather armor for protection. Watching her mana, Lee noticed each magic bullet used 10 MP. He figured that since she probably shopped at the same rank as him, she couldn't buy mana potions yet. Climbing down from the tower, Lee thought that Seoyen only had about 13 shots left, so he and his team had to push forward and break through fast. About half an hour earlier, one player asked Lee how they were supposed to get past the magic bullets and reach the altar safely. Secheng replied that they would move carefully, using cover and zigzagging to avoid getting hit. Lee added that the woman probably couldn't shoot bullets powerful enough to instantly knock Seong out, since each magic bullet likely used her mana. Juno agreed and pointed out that how much mana she had left would be key. Lee nodded and told everyone they needed to be ready to take at least 1 hit from her bullets. Back to the present, a bullet struck one player, but he was smiling because his armor absorbed the damage. Then, the team rushed towards Seoyen, who fired a rapid volley of bullets to slow them down. Realizing her gun alone wouldn't finish them off, Seoyen ordered her teammates to block the attackers and charge at Lee's group. Lee knew this battle would decide everything. Some of their teammates might fall to those magic bullets, so they had to reach the altar fast. During the fight, Lee skillfully blocked every attack, but suddenly a bullet shot straight at him. Just before it hit, Juno deflected the bullet, surprising Seoyen. Juno urged Lee to hurry to the altar, but as he spoke, a bullet struck Juno's head, sending him back to the starting point. Lee was filled with rage as he watched more and more people fall one by one. He realized Seoyeon must be fully aware that those she killed would come back again. But what made him even angrier was the cold, uncaring look on her face, as if she didn't mind killing over and over. Just then, Seoyeon smiled to herself, thinking this group was more challenging than she expected. Seeing that smile made Lee's blood boil. Without hesitation, he unleashed his level 3 basic swordsmanship, cutting down everyone in front of him. Then, with fierce determination, he charged straight at Seoyeon, their weapons crashing fiercely in the center of the altar. As the battle raged on, Seoyeon shouted to his enemies that they were in big trouble now, leaving them puzzled. He explained that since Lee had reached the altar, they no longer had to hold back. With that, Seoyeon unleashed his level 2 stone fist, sending his foes flying. Meanwhile, between Lee and Seoyeon, she expressed disbelief that Lee was so strong despite being only level 2 and asked who he really was. Lee quickly shifted the topic, pointing out how unusual it was for Seoyeon to already be level 13 so early in the game. Lee then stepped onto the altar, and the system notified him that he had occupied it, but 3 players needed to stand there to fully claim it. The system also said he had to push the opposing players off the altar. Lee realized how to take control, but first needed to figure out how to get Seoyeon off. Just then, Seoyeon fired her gun, but Lee dodged the bullet at the last second and counterattacked, only for her to block it. As they fought, Seoyeon grew surprised at Lee's quick dodges, thinking maybe he could predict her moves. Lee thought about Juno, one of the strongest players around and a top swordsman like himself. Juno was famous as a genius table tennis player, known for his amazing ability to predict where the ball would go during fast rallies between pros. At high-level matches, players didn't just watch the ball, they read their opponent's posture and gazed to guess the next move. Juno's skill in prediction earned him the nickname, the Genius of Prediction, and Lee realized he could use this idea to dodge Seoyeon's attacks. At that moment, Lee managed to avoid all her strikes and landed a strong slash that hit her, even though she was still standing. Seoyeon grew annoyed, knowing Lee's stats were higher, but just then Sechang and the others called out that they had finished their fights. Seoyeon added they needed to end this quickly before more enemies showed up. Seoyeon was shocked to learn the return crystal could revive fallen players, and Lee confirmed it, but told her that knowing it didn't help now. Lee decided that even if Seoyeon had a hidden skill that could land a hit, he could handle the damage. He was ready to take the risk and finish the fight right then and there. As Lee charged up his sword, Seoyeon sneered and asked if he really thought he had one. Then, she quickly spent her gold coins to level up her shooting skill to level 4. Lee immediately realized he was in serious trouble and had to finish this now. But just as he rushed at her, Seoyeon fired a perfect shot that hit Lee hard, completely wiping him out and sending him back to the 3rd floor starting point. The system then announced that the 3rd floor mission was over. A short while later, Lee returned to the castle and found Seoyeon standing there looking downcast. Curious, Lee asked why Seoyeon looked so upset, reminding him they had won the fight. Seoyeon replied that although he felt he had carried the mission this time, the gold rewards were disappointingly small. Lee smiled quietly at Seoyeon's complaint. In his mind, Lee thought that even though Seoyeon's surprise counterattack had caught him off guard, he had managed to stab her with his sword at the same moment he was hit. Seoyeon had warned she wouldn't forget Lee's name. After that, Yizil, Sechang, and Seoyeon reached the altar and claimed it, securing their victory. Lee couldn't help but think about Seoyeon again, feeling a chill run down his spine, hoping they would never cross paths again. Just then, Yizil called everyone's attention to the gate that had suddenly opened before them. When they looked through, they saw the group they had just fought trapped behind it. The system then warned that those who lost would now face a disaster, a deadly threat targeting players who hadn't managed a single kill. Suddenly, a mysterious, powerful monster appeared and wiped out everyone trapped beyond the gate. The players begged for help, and Yizil tried to reach through the gate to save them, but it blocked her touch. Helpless, she was forced to watch as they were all destroyed. The crowd froze in disbelief, unable to move or speak as they stared at what had just happened. A short while later, the system announced that only a single player from Zone C 1427 was still alive and that the remaining forces had been reshuffled. Hearing this, Lee felt a chill run through him, since the only person who had successfully killed players, including Lee's group, was Seoyeon. As that thought crossed his mind, footsteps echoed from beyond the gate, and someone slowly emerged. Gasps spread through the group when they recognized the figure standing there. It was Seoyeon herself. Almost immediately, the system declared that a brand new group had now been formed. Not long after, the surviving players arrived on the 4th floor, and one of them quickly pointed out that the area looked like a ruined, deserted city. At that instant, the system issued a new warning, stating that in 6 hours a catastrophic event would strike the cursed city. Their mission was to hunt down and eliminate every monster roaming the area, and then claim an escape portal. The system explained that portals would appear at random locations as monsters were defeated and stressed that only 20 portals would exist in total. It also warned them not to let anyone else use their portal, reminding them once again that they had only 6 hours to finish everything. When the announcement appeared, excitement spread through the players, and one of them laughed, saying it was finally time for a real monster hunting stage. He added that, after enduring the second and third floors, he was actually glad they could fight enemies instead of dealing with other trials. Another player chimed in, pointing out that since there were 20 escape portals and only 13 of them, there was no reason for anyone to clash with each other. Seong then spoke with confidence, claiming this floor was perfect for him, and boldly declared that he planned to wipe out every monster on the 4th floor. He urged everyone else to take advantage of the situation and gain as many levels as possible by slaughtering monsters nonstop. Yizil quickly cut in, stopping Seong mid-rant, and reminded everyone that the system had clearly stated they could not share their portals. Because of that rule, she reasoned, the number of monsters on the 4th floor would likely be limited, meaning they wouldn't appear endlessly. Juno nodded in agreement with her and added that if a single person activated multiple portals, others might be left behind with no way out. He also warned that the surplus of portals could be a hidden trick designed by the tower itself. Sechang then added that regardless of how many monsters they defeated, the smartest move was to enter a portal the moment it appeared. Hearing that, Juno raised his voice and insisted that they all make a promise. Once anyone secured a portal, they would stop fighting immediately and escape the 4th floor without hesitation. After hearing Juno's words, everyone nodded in agreement, but Yizil suddenly noticed something odd about Seong's expression and asked him what was wrong with his face. Seong jumped at the question and quickly denied anything being wrong, insisting that he had always looked this way. Watching the group interact, Lee quietly reflected that after surviving so much together, they had finally learned how to work toward the same goal. For the first time, he felt like they truly functioned as a team, and he resolved to give everything he had. However, that calm thought vanished when he remembered one person who would never accept their plan, Seoyin. Right on cue, Seoyin stood with her arms folded and bluntly demanded to know why she should obey any of them. As she spoke, Seoyin warned them not to try commanding her, threatening to kill them all if they pushed her, and then turned her back and walked away. Behind her, the other players glared with anger, clearly fed up with her attitude, and Lee briefly wondered if it would be better to join forces and eliminate her. 12 hours earlier, Seong had mocked Seoyin, saying this place was no stage for her arrogance, and that without her gun she was nothing but worthless trash. Before anyone could react, she slammed her fist into his face, sending him crashing to the ground. The group froze in shock, stunned both by her sudden attack and by the raw strength she displayed. Standing over him, Seoyin coldly told Seong to stop acting like he had extra lives to waste, finishing her warning by calling him trash to his face. At that very moment, while Seoyin was still berating Seong, Lee stepped in and warned her that she was standing on their ground now and needed to stop causing trouble. As he moved closer to her, Lee reflected on how, back at the start, he had risked everything to eliminate a potential star killer named Junsung. What he never imagined was coming face to face with a true star killer, and worse, one who was deadly even without relying on a gun. While these thoughts raced through his mind, Seoyin calmly remarked that fate had brought them together once more. Lee responded by asking if she had anything important to say, adding that this was hardly the right moment for casual greetings. Before Lee could finish, a sharp sense of danger washed over him, radiating straight from Seoyin. Instinctively, he retreated several steps, and at that exact moment, the system window appeared, announcing that the star killer Seoyin had chosen Lee as her primary target. Staring at the message, Lee felt baffled, unsure of what such a designation truly meant. As he tried to understand, another system panel appeared, displaying a detailed guide, and the contents left him stunned. Meanwhile, Seoyin turned away from the group, her eyes burning with clear irritation and suppressed fury as she walked off. Not long after, Seong was seen locked in combat with an orc. When he finally struck the finishing blow, he strangely apologized to the creature for damaging its handsome face and jokingly told it to turn into his experience points. In its final moments, the confused orc seemed to wonder why another orc-like being was attacking it, before collapsing lifelessly to the ground. The instant the orc collapsed, a glowing portal appeared beside its body, leaving Seong wide-eyed with shock since he had barely defeated a handful of monsters. While he stood there debating what he should do next, Lee suddenly appeared right in front of him, making Seong jump in surprise. Nervously, Seong asked what Lee was doing there, But Lee instead questioned why Sion looked so shaken and whether he had done something suspicious to react that way.